In this video, I'm going to show you some strategies for drawing and painting apples. Apples are a pretty simple 3D shape and they're really accessible, so this is a great way to build your skills and learn how to draw just about anything else.
Hello, my name is Rachel and I'm a professional artist and disciple of Jesus Christ. When you see an apple, what does it make you think of? It may make you think of fall and the start of the school year, picking apples with your friends and family. It may also make you think of something from the Bible. Many people show the Garden of Eden and the fruit that Adam and Eve took from the tree as an apple. Actually, in the Bible, it doesn't say that the fruit that they took was an apple, but this has been a popular image because that was used in one early translation of the Bible. Today, we're going to learn how to draw apples. It's a pretty simple shape, right? What would you say it is? It's a circle, but depending on which way you're looking at it, it might look here like more of a perfect circle, or on the side, you'll see a little bit of a change in the shape at the top and the bottom.
All you really need to start this exercise is a piece of paper, a pencil, an eraser, a sharpener, and a bowl of apples. I'm also using a sketch and wash pencil that can be turned into watercolor. Later on in this video, I'll show some strategies for painting apples using acrylics, but you may want to do that as a separate session and you can get materials before you get started with that. First, I'm going to practice drawing the apple from a couple of different angles. So I'm going to choose one of my apples, put the other ones aside, and in my sketchbook, I'm just going to do 3 little drawings practicing drawing the apple. So first, I'm going to do a top view. When I look at it from the top, it looks mostly like a circle here. But I'm noticing that there's a few spots where there's a little bit of a bend. So I'm going to lay it out on my paper, and for this exercise, I'm going to practice drawing it at pretty much the same size that I see right in front of me. So first I'm going to draw a circle and then mark off where the center is here. I'm just going to put a little plus sign there. If there are any obvious dents in the apple along the sides, I can show that and just adjust. I could use my eraser to help me correct my drawing a little bit, or any places where I left kind of sketchy lines behind. And then pretty easy peasy. There's not too much more to that besides actually starting to shade. When I look at it, it looks like there are shadows that are forming around the bottom of the apple. I can see a shadow that's forming on the paper as well. And I can see a shadow in the dent in here. The areas where it appears to be the brightest would be along this top rim. So now I'm going to take my shading pencil. Today I'm using a sketch and wash pencil, but you can use another type of shading pencil if you would like. And I'm going to just start shading. Now when I shade, I'm going to hold my pencil a little bit more on the side, not up and down as if I was writing. And I'm just going to make some diagonal lines around the edge of the apple, showing where I see shading. Notice that I'm making all of these lines go the same direction. I can correct a little bit on the edges softly if I would like to, but I want all of these edges to go the same direction. What this will do is just help it feel more unified. If you've ever done a marker drawing and you see lines that are going every which way, they're not overlapping nicely, that's the kind of effect I'm trying to avoid here. Now I can also shade in another direction if there are any areas that maybe I want to increase the shading on. So now I'm going over top even of the area that I did before, but going a different direction to show that there is shading that is still in shadow, but a little bit lighter than that first group I created. Then in the center, I'm going to show that there's going to press a little bit harder to show that there's a deep crevice inside. I can see that there's a little bit of a mark in here. There's an indentation there that's deeper than the other parts. And gently shade it out, leaving that white area highlighted. So pretty easy peasy, right? And then if I want to show the shadow underneath, I can do that as well. And it looks like it's quite a bit darker actually than the shading that is on the apple itself. So I'm going to press harder and I'm going to go again a different direction. But one thing you'll notice is that every shadow has a sharp side and a soft side. So there's a sharp side that's where the apple turns into the shadow of the page, and then it gets softer as it gets further away. I have a light that's directly over top of my apple, and so the shadow is going to appear more crisp, like a nice crisp apple, than it would be if I was using a different kind of light source. Whenever you want to blend your shading, don't use your finger because your finger actually has oils inside of it that will cause it not to be able to blend anymore. You can always use a soft tissue, a Kleenex type tissue, or if you have a paper stump, which is a little rolled up piece of paper that has a pointy end on it, you can use that as well. The pencil that I used to do this drawing today is called a sketch and wash pencil. It's a special type of pencil that you can actually paint on, and so that's going to be the best blending strategy for this particular pencil. But I'm showing you first what it would look like if I just blended with my tissue. That's going to soften the effect overall. I can always go back and make things sharper later. Then I'm going to take my paintbrush and just a plain cup of water. I'm using a cup of water that I don't drink out of. I only use it for my art. And with this particular type of pencil, I can put water over it in order to make it look like watercolor. If you don't have this type of pencil though, don't use this method to shade. Use a tissue or a paper stump. When I'm shading this part, I want to make sure that I go over that line a little bit to make sure I keep that nice separation between the apple and the shadow on the page. And in this step, I can use the smoothness of my paintbrush in order to make that edge of the shadow a little bit crisper, like how it looks on my paper today. Because I used the Sketch and Wash pencil, I'm now going to let this dry a little bit before I go back and add any additional details. While I'm letting my first sketch dry, I'll start a second, studying it from a side view. When I look at the side view, it's not going to be quite as round as in the top view. I'll see a little indent on the top and the bottom of the apple. But the basic process of studying what I see and copying the shading is the same. Then I'm going to turn the apple just a little bit more so I'm seeing some of the bottom of the apple as well, which has more of an indent in it, and repeating the same process of shading. Then I can go over it with the water just like I did on the top one. And then while that top one is dry, I'm going to go back and draw some additional shading over top just to make that shadow structure nice and clear. I can also treat my eraser as a tool to go back and add areas of highlight. Now I have 3 sketches of an apple. There are 2 different apples I use. This one is a different one, and this one is the same one from a slightly different angle. It took me a little over 20 minutes to complete these, but if it takes you longer, no worries.
I'm pretty happy with how these turned out, and you can see that they're shading, and I'm really starting to understand what this apple or these apples look like from all different angles. Once you've gotten the hang of drawing one apple, the next challenge is to draw all 3 apples together. This is going to be a fruit bowl, and there's going to be new challenges of understanding how the apples fit together.
I'm showing you now the angle that I was looking at while I sketched the fruit bowl. You know that the top of this looks like a circle, right? But at the angle that I was looking at it from, it didn't look like a circle. It looks like an oval. When you're dealing with this shape, it's called an ellipse. And an ellipse, the side that's closer to you is going to appear slightly bigger than the side that's further away. Because in this picture, the width of the bowl appears to be bigger than the height of the bowl, I'm going to hold my paper horizontally. I'm also going to look at it and estimate how many times wider it is than it is tall, and then mark that off on my page. So once I make those marks, then I'm going to draw an ellipse to fit that shape. I want to make those little horizontal marks a little bit higher than halfway to remind me that the back side of the ellipse is going to look shorter than the front side of the ellipse. Then I'm going to show that from my angle, I could actually see a little bit of the bottom part of the bowl too. Then I'll start filling in the fruit, showing the one that is in the front first, and comparing how much I can see of each one fruit versus the other. I'll correct my bowl a little bit to make sure it's the right shape and that I can see a lip that is visible in the front of the bowl. Then I'll add marks in the center of the apples and to show the shadows, and then I'll start shading in, remembering to go the same direction with each set of marks in order to make the shading consistent, and then overlapping them to add a greater depth of shading to different parts. I'll do the same thing to the bottom of the bowl, showing that it's darker down there because it's away from the light source, and on the inside of the bowl, it's not as dark as the bottom, but there is still some shading there. I'll clean up the edges with an eraser. I'll show some shading, again, deepening it on that indent that's in the center of each apple and around the edges, paying attention even to how the 3 apples are different from each other in the level of shading and in their shapes. Then I'm just continuing to build the shadows, noticing areas where it's especially deep and maybe making some marks. Even in the shadows that are behind the apples, there's going to be a little bit gradation where it gets darker, and then I'm using a tissue, again, not my finger, to blend in a little bit, and then going over again to deepen the shadows even further. And I'm starting to clean my lines up. I moved the bowl in just a little bit because I realized that part didn't look as wide as the top, even though I know it is. The way the angle is makes it look really small. And then I'm showing the shading that's coming underneath the bowl onto the table. Then I'm going to go in with my water in order to create the sketch and wash effect so it looks a little bit softer and more painterly. But if you're using a different type of shading pencil, you can also use a paper stump or paper towel. And I'm even using the direction that I go with my water brush in order to add to that realistic effect. After I have let that first layer of watercolor painted shadow dry, I'm going to go in with a pencil just one more time in order to get this shadow structure really sharp. I'm adding even just some light shading along the edges of the bowl so it looks more realistic in 3D. I'm deepening the shadows on the apples and going back with my eraser to make some parts nice and shiny so that they'll stick out on the page, and doing the same thing along the edges of the bowl too. That'll get it nice and clean. Here is my finished drawing of the 3 apples in the bowl. This one took me a little bit under an hour to do, so a good bit longer than the 3 individual apples took me to draw. It does take some more time figuring out how to place objects together on the page and understanding how they fit into a 3-dimensional structure like a bowl, but it's so worth it to be able to capture more realistic scenes from life. This is my cat Angel coming to say hello. She's jealous that I spent all this time filming the video, and I think she's trying to eat the apples, which would not be good. For this final part of the video, I'm going to show you some strategies to paint apples using acrylic paint. I just have some basic colors here. I have 2 shades of red, yellow, blue, white, and black because those are the primary colors and the best colors for mixing. I also have a range of paintbrushes. I have my sketch and wash pencil and my regular pencil and eraser again. I have a stretched canvas, a palette, some water, and a paper towel. You could also try some of these strategies using other paints such as watercolor or oil if you're comfortable using those. This is how my apple setup appeared to me from where I was sitting, and I arranged them on top of a white piece of paper so that they would really stand out. You could also try arranging them on top of a colorful background too if you would rather have a painted area in the back, because if you do make any mistakes on the background, it's a little bit hard to paint over top of the white. First, what I'm going to do is very similar to what I did for the drawing portion of this lesson. I think it's really important that people learn how to draw before they learn how to paint. So I'm just laying out where those 3 apples sit on the page in relationship to each other. But I'm drawing more lightly than I drew before because with the canvas, the marks aren't going to come off as easily as they did on paper. And this is actually an advantage of using the Sketch and Wash pencil too. Now with the Sketch and Wash pencil, I'm going to shade very lightly, and that's going to help create a shadow structure. So then when I paint over top, I'll have to remember that any colors that I'm using are still going to follow this basic shadow structure. So the Sketch and Wash actually makes a really nice texture with the canvas that's sitting really well. And I'm using the direction that I hold my paintbrush in order to reinforce the direction of the shadows that I already see on the apples. After I finished my sketch, this shows you correcting for the angle so you can see what I see. These apples are mostly red, and the red parts are more on the bottom part, so I'm using dark red, and then I'm transitioning to a lighter red as I get closer to the top just to create that base layer. And then I'm going through and creating a mixed yellow that has a little bit of green as well as a little bit of orange in it in order to create that effect at the top. And then I'm making shadows to show that these apples are sitting on the table. I use a hairdryer to speed up the process, and then I'm using some white to correct places where I still have pencil marks. In real life, the step I just showed you took about 20 minutes, and this is what it looks like. I could stop here if I wanted to, but I'm going to add more detail. Next, I'm going to mix a slightly darker red by taking the darker red that is straight out of the tube and mixing it with some yellow and blue in order to neutralize and darken it. I'm going to keep playing with mixing different versions of red. And then I'm going to mix an even darker yellow to increase the depth illusion that's in the center of the apples. I'll even add a little bit of black to it in order to really make that indentation for the deepest part. And I can also add a little bit of white to the color for areas where I see that the apple is actually a little bit paler. Then I'm going to remix the shadow color, making it lighter because the shadows that I painted at the beginning were too dark for this page. It takes a little bit of trial and error in order to get it right, but I felt happier with this once I adjusted it a little bit closer to reality. Then I just made some final adjustments, painting over little details on top of the apple, including painting the stems last because I didn't want them to get mixed into the rest of the apple. I wanted them to stand out, but there is only a stem on 2 of the apples, so I'll pay attention to small details like that.
This is what I was able to create after about an hour of painting. If I had more time, I would keep working on the shadows, get a more subtle gradient along those edges, and really make sure that those values matched what I saw. But I at least can see a clear shadow structure and some details of the color gradation and the shading that's on the apples too. One thing to note is that because acrylic is basically plastic, it's going to appear a little bit maybe harsher along the edges than some other media such as oil painting or watercolor. So that's just part of the media, but acrylic is a great choice if you want to paint something quickly. On that note too, afterwards, it's very important to clean your palette. Depending on how much paint you have stuck in the palette, you have a couple of options. Because acrylic is actually plastic, it's pretty bad to put down the sink. And so my recommendation actually is to let it dry and then either peel out the paint or use rubbing alcohol in order to wipe it away and then rinse it off. That gets it pretty clean if you're using a plastic palette like this. And make sure also to rinse your brushes as well. Rinse them with soap and water. If you like this video, please like and subscribe to receive more high quality content helping you grow as an artist and a disciple of Jesus Christ. Until next time.